Stephen, it's a pleasure to have you with us. You've been a loyal supporter of this conference for, I saw in the statistics, 7 out of 7 years. I hope we won't break that habit in the 8th year. Obviously in different functions, but always with very provocative and new thoughts, which is exactly what we're trying to do in this conference. So over to you. It's a real pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you very much, Nick, and thank you very much for those kind words. I was not planning on breaking the 7 times that I've now been in this wonderful conference, and so I'm looking forward to receiving the invitation again for next year. I have prepared some remarks for my contribution today, and they will be available later today also at the website of DNB. Almost 10 years ago, in 2014, an article on the secret life of passwords was published in the New York Times. The author of the article, Ian Urbina, was fascinated by what people use as passwords. And after collecting stories about passwords for some time, he heard about scholarly research on a gigantic password hack. A few years earlier, in 2009, a database of 32 million passwords had been published on the internet. And this triggered a group of academic researchers from the University of Ontario Institute of Technology to start analyzing the database. Not only with a security focus, but also with a linguistic, psychological, and anthropological focus. And they found that for every 10 passwords, 1 turned out to be a name or a name plus a year. For every 1,000 passwords, 2 turned out to be the word password. And the most commonly used verb turned out to be love, tellingly more often in combination with a man's name than with a woman's. None of these popular passwords are safe options, of course. So it's no wonder that the overall conclusion one of the researchers drew was not overly optimistic. He was worried about the fate of our privacy. To him, the database made clear that humans really are the weak link when it comes to data security. This was almost 10 years ago. A lot has happened since then. Today, when you log in on your device, you often still use a password, but probably in combination with facial recognition, fingerprints, or a piece of unique hardware. Unfortunately, however, humans remain the weak link in data security. Last year's Global Risk Report from the World Economic Forum says that 95% of cybersecurity issues can be traced back to human errors. The report also says that in 2020, there was an increase of 435% in ransomware compared to 2019. Many of you are probably familiar with the ransomware attack on a big American insurer a few years ago. This insurer ultimately had to pay $40 million to retrieve its data and regain control of its systems. The report also says that, worldwide, we will need 3 million additional cyber professionals to adequately protect our data. Professionals for cyber leadership, to test and secure systems, and to train people in digital hygiene. From my perspective, as a supervisor with the Nederlandsche Bank, I can only underscore the urgency to act that speaks from this report. My aim is to safeguard trust in the financial system. And cybercrime, be it a data leak or ransomware or any other form, poses a significant threat to that trust. What happened to the Central Bank of Bangladesh in 2016 was a loud and clear reminder. But it is of course no wonder that cyber threats are on the rise. Over the years, financial institutions have been morphing more and more into IT companies with a banking license. More and more of what financial institutions do happens digitally. And as a consequence, the IT infrastructure has become more and more essential to the functioning of the financial institution as a whole. In the past, it was the vault with cash and coins that needed protection. Today, it's the digital infrastructure. Three other evolutions further complicate effective protection of data and operational continuity. First, there is the increasing interconnectedness between financial institutions. They rely on each other for many services, including handling transactions, balances, clearing, and settlement. A disruption at one financial institution could have consequences for another. Second, the increasing digital dependency on specialized third parties, for instance, for cloud solutions, payment systems, or security operations centers. Often, this makes sense, if only for the economies of scale that come with outsourcing. But by now, we have reached a point where a significant number of financial institutions are highly dependent on third-party services for some of their vital processes. And this creates a potential security threat. If an external party were to fall victim to cybercrime, this could permeate through the entire financial system with severe results. The third evolution is that only a few specialized and increasingly dominant providers handle the majority of outsourced services and processes. And some of them are definitely very well equipped to counter cyber attacks. Nevertheless, with this evolution comes a concentration risk. If one of those service providers were to encounter operational difficulties or get hacked, a lot of its financial clients might experience difficulties. Across the board, it is safe to say that as the digitalization of financial services increases and the subsequent interconnectedness, dependency and concentration along with it, the more difficult it becomes for a financial institution to estimate if, how, and when it runs the risk of a cyber attack. Let me now turn to the Netherlands. In its studies from 2021 and 2022, the Nederlandsche Bank found that, on average, 5% of financial institutions in the Netherlands had to deal with the repercussions of a successful cyber attack at some point. Successful in this case does not necessarily mean that corporate operations were in danger or that data was stolen, but it does mean that there was a security breach. But overall, it remains hard to pinpoint exactly how many cyber attacks occur in the Netherlands and what the success rate is. So that begs the question, how well prepared for cyber attacks is the Dutch financial sector? The CyberNL program, developed and coordinated by the Nederlandsche Bank, gives us an idea. Cyber is short for Threat Intelligence-Based Ethical Red Teaming. Financial institutions participate voluntarily in staged test attacks, using them to gauge their cyber resilience. The aim is to gain insight into strengths and weaknesses and to identify areas for improvement. Afterwards, they share experiences and improvement plans with other institutions. Over the past 5 years, the Nederlandsche Bank has coordinated over 40 cyber tests on vital Dutch institutions. And in many cases, and in many of the cases, ethical hackers successfully accessed critical parts of the financial institutions' systems. The results of the cyber tests have led financial institutions to take measures to increase their cyber resilience. But the results also tell us that we need to remain vigilant at all times. And I'm pleased that our cyber program has inspired the European Central Bank to draw up the Cyber EU framework. And this is important, because increasing cyber resilience will, at least partly, need to happen on a European level, simply because cyber attacks know no borders. That is why I'm also very pleased with the finalization of the Digital Operational Resilience Act, or very well known as DORA. From 2025 onwards, financial institutions will have to comply with this European regulation aimed at increasing cyber resilience. This means, among other things, that third parties will have to comply with certain cybersecurity criteria. Hence, they will become part of the supervisor's scope. With Cyber, we already have an instrument that supervisors could use to broaden their scope from financial institutions to third parties. But even with such an instrument at hand, successful supervision will always require a degree of adaptability. It will always require the capacity to identify and understand new risks and threats and adapt accordingly. To successfully do this, consistent and constructive collaboration between financial institutions, third parties, and supervisors will remain at the heart of cyber resilience. Another part of DORA is that a financial institution's leadership will need to be highly involved in cybersecurity. This is fully in line with what the Nederlandsche Bank has been working on for some time now, increasing the boardroom's cyber knowledge and expertise. Whenever corporate digital strategy is discussed, somebody who knows the ins and outs of cybersecurity should have a seat at the table. So I'm very pleased with the regulatory advancements, but compliance alone is not a financial institution's recipe for success. However important, it is a mere ingredient. Financial institutions themselves are responsible for the entire recipe. And just as a professional kitchen can't operate without the basic ingredients like salt and pepper, a financial institution must have its basic cybersecurity ingredients in place. Without the salt and pepper of cybersecurity, a financial institution is a sitting duck for cyber attacks. You could think, for instance, about drafting and implementing a security policy, a policy that explicitly describes who gets access to your offices, how people should protect their hardware and software, and how new employees should be screened, or how digital vulnerabilities like necessary software updates are managed, or whether a cybersecurity crisis plan and team are set up. And most importantly, the basic ingredients of cybersecurity should not just be put in writing. They should not just be items on people's to-do list. Everyone, from staff to top management, in-house or third party, everyone must understand why this is important. The article on the secret life of passwords I talked about a few minutes ago reveals how important the why is for people. The author of the article spoke to dozens of people about their passwords, and he found that a lot of passwords have rich background stories. A lot of passwords are a motivational mantra. A lot of them are a daily reminder of something important or someone important. Of course, this is exactly what makes passwords potentially unsafe. This is exactly what hackers aim for. And this is exactly why more and more often additional safety measures are used, like facial recognition or fingerprints. But the answer to diminishing the weak link in cybersecurity, which is us humans, might not be to take away meaning, but on the contrary, to build on it. Today, the complexity people have to deal with is increasing sharply, just like the complexity of the financial landscape. The number of third parties is increasing, just like the interconnectedness and the dependency. The complexity of cyber threats is increasing, just like the measures to prevent them. And it is hard to predict when or where the next cyber attack will hit, but chances are that it will have to do with the human error. And so it's all the more important that people in all layers of an organization know the why of it all, why they need to follow certain processes and procedures, why they should preferably use meaningless passwords, why they need to protect themselves and with that their colleagues, their institutions and the whole financial system. Here lies a great responsibility for financial institutions, the responsibility of giving meaning. But one thing seems clear, cyber resilience should definitely not lead a secret life. It should very much lead a human life. Thank you very much for your attention. And I hand back over to you, Nick.
Thank you very much indeed, Stephen. I loved the reference to the secret world of passwords. I noticed you didn't reference that most passwords end with 111, for example, which is interesting. But I think you raise an important point, which is kind of the opportunity, but also the risk of human beings and human intervention. And we've seen that, of course, many times. If you're okay, I might just ask you a few questions based on the speech. And by the way, the tone quality was excellent after about a minute or two, so it was very good. You mentioned TIBE, and actually I didn't know that this originated in the Netherlands. But TIBE as a penetration testing system was reintroduced into DORA. It was importantly explicitly referenced. But many of the financial institutions are global financial institutions. So doing penetration testing in Europe is one thing, but ultimately what we really need is penetration testing at the level of the FSB or Basel Committee. I think it's the FSB which is leading on this. So how do we fit the TIBE framework into such global penetration testing frameworks?
Thank you very much, Nick. And you rightly point out to an important issue is that I think a key characteristic of cybersecurity is that this is not a national issue, this is a European issue, and to some extent it's also a global issue. And so making sure that the coordination across border is done appropriately and effectively is part of the real effectiveness of the TIBE test. And the way it's currently done is that central banks, and I think it's important here to emphasize, it's on the TIBE program and the penetration testing. It's really the central banks that are in the forefront and are taking the lead. Obviously, I'm a supervisor and have a great interest in this topic. It's relevant also for, let's say, the proper management of financial institutions, but it's been the central banking community that is here in the forefront. And it are the national central banks that are, let's say, in the lead there under the strong coordination of the ECB, and those, let's say, the home regulator of those where the TIBE tests are conducted for an individual financial institution works with the, let's say, TIBE teams across the different affiliates, subsidiaries of those banks that are active also outside one jurisdiction. And so it is part of the TIBE test is that this is done across the financial institution, including those parts of the financial institution which are in another part of the world and another part of the country.
Interesting. So in a way, maybe I'm paraphrasing it wrong, but it's an extension of the supervisory college structure effectively. But you can comment on that. That's interesting. That's encouraging. A second point was you talked about incident reporting, a key element also of DORA and the work you're doing. Now, this was a more hotly contested issue in the co-legislator discussions on DORA as to what is an incident and what needs to be reported to whom and when. And there was this fine line to be drawn between over-reporting, like we have an anti-money laundering, suspicious transaction reporting, and on the other hand, making sure the supervisor doesn't miss a trick, doesn't see a gap, or misses a trend of things that are emerging that might not yet be significant incidents, but show kind of a change of patterns. How do you think that balance should be drawn, or what elements should be taken into consideration when drawing that balance?
Well, I think this is an important issue. It's a key issue is making sure that you don't want to have any, let's say, information overload. On the other hand, you also don't want to miss as a public authority important signals, and so it is important that we get the right balance there. And as you know, Nick, that if something is a hot potato and cannot be solved at a political level, then it needs to be solved, let's say, at the level 2 and by the ESAs. And so this is now part of the conversations and the preparations of level 2 of DORA. Making sure that that there is the right balance between indeed not too much information and not too less information. And so I would also encourage very much the stakeholders, the participants to participate in these consultations and get the level right. I'm also very happy that this is done at level 2, because you can imagine that what is the right level of information and the amount is also will change over time. The more experience we get with and the more mature the reporting system gets, the better able and the demands and what should be possible will change over time. And so it is now in front of us in the level 2 debates, but I'm sure that this over time will continue to be an important part and make sure that let's say the right calibration will change over time, depending on experiences, depending on the type of cyber attacks that we are experiencing. And so it's very good that that is not part of, let's say, that there is the possibility to recalibrate that at the level 2.
I think you're right. I always jokingly say, if you want to know what was the contentious issues during the co-legislative process, look at the list of delegated acts and RTSs that need to be prepared. But looking into the technology context, I totally agree with you, and I think there was a common theme in this conference so far. To be nimble, to be adaptable to different changing needs and different technological capacities, it is important to rely much more on the supervisory authority.
Yeah, to some extent, the argument holds even more than let's say in the past. We've, as you know, in my previous role, I've made that comment is to make sure is that the level 2 is a real level 2, is that we don't wait for, let's say, the primary legislation to change in response to technological developments. That is even more relevant in current times, is that you have a regulatory system which is adaptable to changing circumstances.
One other thing in DORA, which actually when I saw the original proposal, even before we went into any discussions, I found them in a way most positive article, is one that's hardly being talked about now. And that is the one that facilitates voluntary information exchange between financial institutions, takes it out of questions of privacy or security concerns. How do you see that evolving? And what is, let's say, the relationship between voluntary information exchange between financial institutions and incident reporting that's more formal and provided to supervisors?
Well, I think what is and what I've it's a very important point, Nick. And what I try to underline in the speech is to what extent cybersecurity is an issue around interconnectedness. It is once one institution is attacked, there are 2 points. First of all, they are interconnected, so there can be operational links, and that if one key player is attacked, it will affect other connected players, but also a attack on one player might be an indication of another attack on a competitor. And so I think this kind of this external effect element of cybersecurity is so important to underline. And that is also the reason why it is so important. And you said it's one of your favorite articles in DORA, is why this should not be let's say, a source of competitive advantage. This is something where individual institutions need to work together, but also where financial institutions need to work together with the public authorities. And that is the reason we have the reporting to the public authorities. But equally important, they should not, let's say, wait until responses, etc., from the public authorities. The voluntary sharing of this information and fast sharing of this information is so important. And so we already have, in the Netherlands, there is already a network by financial institutions that facilitates that. I'm sure that also these are available in other jurisdictions. But as you rightly say, the sharing of information between financial institutions is a key pillar of cybersecurity. This should not be a source of competitive advantage.
Thank you, Stephen. And maybe one last question, conscious of time, but because you raised and gave it quite some prominence in your speech, and I found it interesting, and again, it came up repeatedly in different sessions, is the role of governance, the role of the board, the executive in financial institutions, and its role, responsibility, and capabilities in overseeing cyber risk, but also more broadly the digital transformation. You said that there needs to be somebody on the board who can understand cyber risks, but we have, of course, a knowledge gap, not maybe enough qualified individuals, And while most financial institutions have now appointed a chief technology officer, of course that knowledge cannot just rest in the hands of one woman or one man on the board. And I'd be interested to hear how you think, as the fit and proper process evolves and continues to evolve, how knowledge of technological transformation, cyber risk, use of data will become potentially more important and relevant when it comes to the appointment of board members to financial institutions.
Yeah, what I try to underline in the speech, Nick, first of all, is that we're very happy with DORA. Very important that DORA is agreed and that we're now progressing with towards implementation. But obviously, it's not only about the legal requirements, but also really making sure that individuals in an organization have an understanding why there is a range of measures to protect against cyber risks is so important. And part of that is also making sure that there is the right knowledge at the board level. By the way, this is not only, let's say, at the executive level, it's also on the supervisory board. It is also, it's through the organizations. Reality is that organizations are changing to digital organizations. That is what we're in. We're in the middle of that process, and there's a catching up of knowledge. And I agree, it is a challenge. We know there's a general shortage of resources, human resources across the board, even more so in the digital and IT area. But considering the risks that we run in this part of how they can affect financial institutions, it is important that we build our knowledge. It's also an issue for us as supervisor, where we need to invest more in people with this type of knowledge, and surely this should also be a part of a organization that is digital, is that it is also sufficiently represented in the board and also is reflected in the fit and proper assessments. It is difficult to see how you can strategically prioritize yourself or position yourself as let's say, a digital organization and then not have that knowledge at the highest level. So that is a logical link between the fit and proper assessment and the expectations, the direction that financial institutions are taking.
It's interesting because yesterday a colleague from the SSM said that they're using artificial intelligence when going through the applications of candidates for the fit and proper test. So we will have artificial intelligence testing our digital capacity when we want to be on the board of a financial institution, which is cyclical in a way.
Yes. Of course, there's always somewhere. It is important that we somewhere keep human judgment, very important, but that we also use advanced technology to go through large data sets, large pieces of text, because to do that all, let's say, purely human is becoming impossible, and you can do it much more efficient. Also using algorithms and advanced digital technologies. At the same time, it is very important that we keep human judgment in the chain somewhere.
Thank you, Stephen. It was an absolute pleasure having you with us as always. Thanks very much indeed to Stephen Maijoor, Executive Director of the Dutch.
Thank you very much.
Bank. See you soon, Stephen.